Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you are invited to join me for a visit with luminaries. I got a luminary with me today in personal development and cultural evolution. I think he would humbly deny that he's a luminary, but I think he's pretty bright. Anyway, this is your host, Paul O'Brien, and we're going to talk about climate change today. And after 3 decades of failed international efforts to avoid catastrophic climate change, progressive visions of a better world are increasingly frustrated by ecological and social breakdown. The geophysical forces unleashed by carbon-fueled global heating have converged with forms of political nihilism not seen since the rise of fascism in the early 20th century. And for many, despair has become the only honest response. Our guest today is Wen Stephenson, author of the book Learning to Live in the Dark: Essays in a Time of Catastrophe. Wen is a Harvard graduate and got a master's from the University of Chicago. He's now an independent journalist and climate activist, a contributing writer for The Nation. Formerly an editor at The Atlantic and the Boston Globe, he has also written about climate, culture, and politics for Slate, the New York Times, Grist, and the Boston Phoenix. Well, hello, Wen, and welcome to the Pathways Show.
Hi, Paul. It's good to be here. Thanks for that intro.
I'm going to quote something from the intro to your book, Living in the Dark. Um, if it's comfort or some kind of cost-free hope you're looking for, be warned that these essays make no such promises. Okay, so what is the promise? I personally found much of the material depressing, so I'm wondering, what am I missing? What motivated you to compile this book? And what is your hope that readers will take away from it?
Sure. I mean that's the question, right? I I wouldn't be here if I wasn't prepared to answer that question. Yeah, well, um, it's good or understandable at least. It's entirely appropriate that you would be depressed uh, reading this book because the book is about the world that we're in. It's about what this planet and the people on it are facing. And it's more than depressing. It's cause for, as you were noting there in the like the publicity blurb for my book, for many of us, myself included, despair has become the only honest response. But I can't just leave it at that, you know? Um,
I know,
there's,
but
there's more to it than that. So,
okay.
the reason I wrote this book is because in late 2016 and 2017, after the election of Donald Trump, and uh, I was in a very dark place. Um, And as both professionally and in terms of my work as not just as a journalist on climate and politics, but as an activist, I had just written a book, my first book called What We're Fighting For Now Is Each Other, which was about the pivotal early years of the US climate and climate justice movement. And that came out in 2015. Okay. And it was about my own journey into that movement, from being a mainstream journalist, being a recovering mainstream journalist
And so
to,
the title of the book
yeah,
makes me think that maybe it was a reaction to the difficulty of coordinating even with your cohorts.
yes, yes. So we had experienced a exhilarating peak of climate activism and even some progress up to 2015 here in the US, building the climate movement, and then the signing of the Paris Agreement in 2015. But with the election of Trump, all of that just seemed to be wiped away. Now, it wasn't all just wiped away, but it sure felt like it. And it feels like it even more now. So there I was, and I was in despair. And I needed a reason to not just quit, to not just give up on this. I felt like I had committed this to print, that I had committed the rest of my life to this cause, to this struggle, you know? Um, and yet here we were, and I needed a reason to keep going. I mean, I was literally at the point where I was questioning my reasons and my desire to live.
Well, is this because was the compellingness of this for you related to the fact that this is like a survival issue?
It didn't feel like a survival issue, an immediate survival issue for myself or even my family, although I did have young children at the time. I mean, my kids are now 25 and 21, but they were, a lot younger than that then. And certainly being a parent had a lot to do with it. And knowing, having gone deep on climate science and then looking at the political realities, just knowing what this meant for the kind of world that they were going to have to live in and live into. And so, um, I guess what I did is, uh, you know, I went looking for what I think of as the intellectual and like moral resources or even spiritual sources of not just hope, but what I call resolve. What I think of, I needed something more than a kind of abstract, airy hope. I needed resolve. I needed something in my body, something visceral that was
Well,
going
is it
to.
resolved based on hope?
That's a good question. No, I think that we need something beyond the abstract and the intellectual, which is essentially what hope is. I mean, people who talk a lot about hope are always trying to make the case for it. They're always trying to reason their way into hope. But I don't really think that's necessarily possible anymore. And so what you need is something deeper. You need a kind of faith. You need something that's going to enable you to get out of bed in the morning and face the situation that we're in.
It kind of reminds me of the Buddhist concept of non-attachment in the sense that you can be active and you can do things and if but it and the desire to do that's just great. But if you refrain from attachment to outcome,
Mm,
still do your thing. You can still exercise your resolve, as you put it,
yep.
and without with
Yes.
insisting on a concrete hope.
That's right. That's right. And in the years before this all, in the years around the time that I burned out in my mainstream media career and took some time off and then decided to plunge into climate work. That was around 2010. Before that, I had faced addiction. I had realized I was an alcoholic, and I quit drinking in 2006. And I've been sober now for gosh, nearly 20 years now.
Wow.
And in the process,
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. And in the process of that, I also uh, went back to an earlier interest that I had had, as in my 20s, I'd become very interested in Buddhism. So it's entirely appropriate that you would mention Buddhism. And I started meditating and joined a Zen Buddhist Sangha in the Boston area, and I've been doing that now for over 20 years. And or thereabouts. And so yes, what you're saying is exactly right on some level. But I think what I'd really like to address is this idea of despair, this reality of despair. And
No, 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 wait a
That's
minute.
bullshit.
Despair
Yeah.
is an emotional, it's an emotion. It's an emotional reaction to a perceived reality.
Maybe. I see it as a little more complicated than that. So
Okay.
what I say to people is that given what we're up against, if you look at the scientific and the political realities,
Yeah.
despair of some sort, despair on some level is warranted, okay? So it's not, as some would tell you, like, perhaps in the Catholic tradition, it's not a sin. Despair is not a sin. It's not a moral weakness. It's not a flaw in your character. It's entirely understandable, and in fact, it's even rational in some
Yeah,
way.
it seems very reasonable. Yeah.
But it is dangerous and it is defeating, especially if you have any desire to change the world. If you are trying to work as part of a movement, a political movement, social movement, ecological work, despair is dangerous and defeating. So
Okay,
it's
so
something that needs to be worked through with others, preferably in community, or at least with a therapist, which is what I've done,
I
and still do.
think everybody needs a therapist, especially these
Right.
days.
Right.
Okay,
So
so
I
you talk
learned to
about,
live. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
but that's okay. I was just going to say that you point out that the only thing worse than climate catastrophe is climate catastrophe plus fascism. So you're bringing in the political uh, poison that we live through.
That's right.
Um, and, you know, then you bring up the point in the book about commitment. And if a viable revolutionary mass movement, which is what we think is going to take a political movement, I mean, according to the essay that I read, but if that's nowhere to be found, then what does a life of radical commitment look like in the face of catastrophes that do not wait?
Yes.
That's a
Yes.
heavy question. So, what is that life of radical commitment that you seem to be encouraging?
Yeah. Well, it can mean many different things. It's going to mean something a little different for each person. And I'm not here to prescribe a particular form of a life of radical commitment for any individual. But I think it has certain characteristics. I think that what we need, and remember that I'm writing about this in the context of someone very much on the left who is engaged in a social movement and is aligned with and in solidarity with other social movements. So I'm talking about movement building, I'm talking about politics at that level.
I see. So
Yeah.
that's really the focus of the book.
Oh yeah. And so, um, well, I mean, the focus of the book is really it's a kind of moral ethical inquiry into how do we live into this catastrophic time, right? And so I look at big thinkers of the mid 20th century who faced the abyss in their own time, the abyss of
Right.
World War II and the Holocaust and
Yeah.
nuclear Armageddon and so on. And I asked myself, how did they encounter the worst that human beings can do and not give up on human beings, right? That's what I'm
Well,
about.
they've escaped to America.
No, not all of them. And because that's what I'm reaching for is a kind of universal human solidarity, a kind of, a universal humanism. That's what I have found. That's the source of my resolve. Okay. It's other people. It's you. It's my comrades. You know, it's solidarity, human, universal
Well,
solidarity.
from my point of view, it's very easy to argue that humanity is an accursed species, and that since the Industrial Revolution, we have just completely gone crazy with our carbon addiction, etc., and overpopulation as a result of this whole different way of living. Um, so that it's just kind of seems kind of hopeless to me.
Yeah. Well, and it's again, it's entirely understandable that you would think that. But I'm
I mean,
not
I
really,
look back to the hunter-gatherers with some longing.
yeah, sure. I don't, yeah. I mean, I'm not willing to give up on human beings as we are right now.
I'm against human reproduction.
Okay, okay, that's fair. Good luck with that.
I shouldn't probably say that, you
Good
know.
luck with that. But so yeah, so back to this life of radical commitment. What I'm trying to do, and my comrades, my colleagues, are trying to do, is 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 build a kind of political movement, a kind of social, broad-based social movement that might actually have the power at some point to stop what's happening. And in order to do that, okay, it has to be powerful enough to essentially overthrow the fossil fuel regime, and the political, the carbon industrial complex, industrial complex regime, whatever, which, as I say in my essay on Hannah Arendt, is like essentially totalitarian in its
Oh, totally,
lust for
totally.
power and global domination, right? And so it's going to require something more than what we have had up to now, what we've seen up to now. It's going to require a level of commitment and
Right.
radical, what I call radical commitment. Okay. That means radical in the sense of a radical analysis, an analysis that really goes to the root and understands the root of the problem, which in this case is fossil capitalism. But also a willingness to engage in radical tactics, which haven't really been tried up to now. I mean, I've engaged in tactics, and a lot of others have that are certainly considered radical by most people. Things like blockading a coal freight train, multiple coal freight trains on their way to a coal-fired power plant, or people who lock themselves down to on construction
Is
sites
this the
of
kind of thing that you're encouraging?
pipelines. What am I? Is this the kind of thing? What?
That you are encouraging?
Absolutely, absolutely. I've done it myself. I know a lot of people who are part of that part of the climate justice movement, and we need more and more of that. But beyond that, it also requires a commitment. Okay, so let's that word commitment.
Yeah, but not very, a lot of
Yeah,
people are not really up for this sort of radical activism where they're
sure, sure.
where
And
they're
I
going to
understand that, of
go.
course. And I don't think anyone, certainly not me or anyone I know who's serious about this, expects everyone to be at that level of commitment. Somebody
Okay,
who's
so I'm a
pushed that.
reader of your book, and
Yeah,
what is it that you are calling for in the publishing of this set of essays?
right.
What are you hoping that people will take from it? Because different people are in different stages of life and they have different levels of investment in whatever, their
Yeah.
family system or whatever. So what is it, what are you hoping for here? That's the
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
question I
yeah.
started with. But I want to ask it again.
Yeah, sure. Uh, what I want people to understand is that a certain degree of uh, catastrophe, climate catastrophe, is now inevitable.
Right.
Saying that is not fatalism. I'm not a fatalist. I'm not a doomer. Okay. Because in fact, I get kind of frustrated with people in the climate movement, for example, who accuse people like me of being a fatalist and a doomer simply because I acknowledge reality. Okay. But if anyone thinks what I'm saying is fatalism, then please read my book. All right. It's the farthest thing from fatalism. I mean, I wouldn't be willing to give my life to this if I were a fatalist. So, so the reason I'm not a fatalist is because I know that we still have the agency, okay, to affect the future. We can still affect the scale and the severity of this global catastrophe. And most importantly, we can affect what sort of a society and what sort of a political and economic system we have as we live into this society. All right. Would you rather have climate catastrophe and a democracy, a social democracy that has universal health care and in which people are treated as human beings? Or would you rather have climate catastrophe plus fascism, which is what we are looking at now? All
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
So it's too late to prevent a certain degree of catastrophe and a certain level of, desperation on people's part. But the question is, what will we do with that desperation? What will that desperation lead to?
Right. And the answer is
Yeah.
political. The answer
Right,
is
right.
political activism.
And that can go in some very dark directions. And I deal with that in the book. I say that one direction it could go is violence, is organized violence, armed
Oh, I'm not
struggle.
talking about that. I'm talking about,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
well, there've been a lot of political activism lately. I mean, AOC and Bernie, I was really gratified by what they were doing, but I'd like to see a lot more media on that. But
Mm.
anyway, yeah,
Yeah, totally.
right, right. You know,
Absolutely.
you do such a great job in this book about outlining the potential levels of catastrophe that we're facing. The sixth mass extinction of species,
Sure.
but this time caused by humanity.
Yes.
I mean, to me, it's just amazing. If you look at, I mean, Al Gore put that documentary together. What was it called? Inconvenient Truth.
Yep.
Wow, that thing was so well done and so
Almost 20 years ago now.
I know,
Almost
and
20 years ago.
I think it was more than 20 years ago. It
I think
was scientific as
2005,
hell.
six or seven, 2006, I think. Yeah.
Okay, and so
Something like that.
and
Right
it was,
around then. Right around then. Yeah.
it was so scientific. It was basically incontrovertible, and the title was perfect.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you know, it's just how can you dispute? This is very simple science. The greenhouse effect is nothing complicated about that. It's just like it's unbelievable how the powers that be wield misinformation and it's gotten out of control now. It's like,
Exactly. Exactly. So look, we have to recognize that we all along we have been up against the most powerful, one of the wealthiest, most powerful, and really most
lies.
ruthless industries and political forces on Earth, and that's the fossil fuel industry and its political backers. Okay. And as you say, they have conducted a 30 plus year campaign of misinformation about
And
this
now
issue.
Trump is appointing those leading,
Oh, absolutely. They are, yes.
voices.
They're members of his cabinet. They are, I mean, remember the first thing he did, first appointment he made after he won the election in 2016 was to appoint Rex Tillerson, the CEO of ExxonMobil, as his Secretary of State. That's as if that didn't make it clear what was going on. Yeah, yeah. So the point is, and that we to be serious about this means we actually have to defeat that powerful uh, force. Okay. It's not,
Global
it
lobby.
takes nothing less than overthrowing that. And that's going to require, a kind of political revolutionary movement and revolutionary change, not just nibbling around the edges, not kind of, as I call sort of head in the sand incrementalism. Yeah.
Right, right. Wow. I like there's so many really fantastic nuggets in your book and things that I could quote. Like for instance, um, the argument that capitalism's sanctification of private property will cost us the earth. This,
Yes, that
this is like one of my
Andreas
favorite.
Malm. Yeah, so the great he's a Swedish economic historian and radical left political theorist named Andreas Malm, who wrote a book that many people will have heard of called How to Blow Up a Pipeline.
Right,
Which became a surprise bestseller. And he doesn't actually tell anyone how to blow up a pipeline, but he makes the case for it. He explains why that level of fight, is necessary at this point and morally justified. But yeah, it's that simple. If we continue to privilege corporate property, corporations in general, we continue to treat corporations as people,
Yeah, right, of
you
course.
know, then there's no hope at all. I mean, we're just going to continue on with business as usual.
You know, your book, this whole like contrast between hope and despair is something that I get hooked on all the time. And
Mm,
and the only thing I got to tell you, just is just me. I'm not arguing for this for anybody else, but the only thing
yeah.
at this point, the only thing that gives me hope, and I'm in my 70s, so I'm not going to live forever, but it's like the only thing that gives me hope is my belief in reincarnation,
Hmm,
which is a Buddhist concept. I
of
like the
course.
way the Tibetans look at it. But that kind of gives me hope because I realize, oh, there is no death. And it's like changing clothes and you're going into the next. Um, and also, it gives me a sense of meaning. It's like if I do good things to help the earth heal or whatever, that's going to earn me some merit so that maybe I can get a better reincarnation. Like
Yeah.
maybe I can leverage my merit to tell God, hey, please. Don't send me back to Earth. Can
Yeah. Yeah, no, man, I get it. I get it. And that's why there's a spiritual thread to this book. I mean, this is a very personal book. It's a climate book, but it's not your typical climate book in the
Right,
sense
right, right,
it's not a policy book. It's not wonky, and it's
right.
not a solutions book in that sense. The
Well,
only solution I'm proposing is radical politics, right? That's where
right.
we're at.
Getting
But
politically
yeah,
active.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And there is this spiritual thread to this book because that's what I'm saying. Like in a way, that's where the resolve to get up and face the day and face our reality, that's where it comes from, whatever it may be for you.
right.
If you're a Buddhist in the Tibetan tradition, fantastic. I'm a Zen Buddhist. I'm also a Christian. I haven't completely given up on my Christian upbringing,
I
but
have.
I'm one of those crazy Christian Buddhists, who try to have it all ways at once.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, whatever works for you, Wen. And thank you so much.
Yeah.
There's so much more that we could explore, but we've run out of time. And I want to be sure to tell our listeners about your website where they can get a lot more information about what you're doing and what you're putting out. And that's wenstephenson.com, which is the spelling of your name, all one word, Wenstephenson.com. And for those who may have tuned in late to Pathways, this is your host, Paul O'Brien, producer of the Visionary I Ching Oracle, an app that supports great decisions and perfect timing. Now, don't worry, you can play and or share this interview whenever you want via the internet or as a free podcast, and I'll tell you how in a minute. Today, we've been visiting with Wen Stephenson, author of the book Learning to Live in the Dark, Essays in a Time of Catastrophe. Really great read. It's so fascinating and it's illuminating, but it's challenging too. And I want to say a heartfelt thank you to all of you listeners for tuning into Pathways, which is broadcast on KBOO.FM in Portland, Oregon. Or perhaps you subscribe to the podcast version for free, which you can find at divination.com, DIVI nation.com, or better yet, search for Pathways Radio on my YouTube channel, where you can give us a thumbs up and subscribe. And please feel free to forward a link to your friends. This is Paulo bidding you adieu and reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways Podcast. And thanks again to Wen and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways conversation.